For 3 days, heaven was silent. The tomb stood cold and sealed. No crowds, no miracles, no more words, just silence. But have you ever stopped to ask, what really happened to Jesus during those 72 mysterious hours between the cross and the resurrection? Could it be that the silence was not empty at all? After Jesus took his final breath on the cross, the skies darkened, the earth trembled, and the curtain in the temple tore in two. It was finished, or so it seemed. But between that final cry and the morning he rose again was a silence so deep, so mysterious, that even Scripture says little. What was happening in those unseen hours? Where was Jesus? What was he doing? This silence wasn't just stillness. It was the calm before the greatest victory in history. The silence that speaks. It's in the hospital room, in the unanswered prayer, in the lonely midnight when heaven seems far away. After Jesus died, there were no angel choirs, no more parables, no more miracles, only silence. But silence doesn't mean nothing is happening. In fact, it's often where everything begins to shift. Think about a seed buried in soil, invisible, silent, but underneath, life is preparing to rise. The 3 days after the cross were not an absence of God's power. They were a hidden movement of victory. Just like in your own life, when God seems quiet, it doesn't mean he's absent. It may mean he's working in the dark, doing something deeper than you can yet see. The silence wasn't weakness. It was the sacred stillness before a world-shaking breakthrough. What the Bible actually says. The Bible doesn't hand us a detailed timeline of those 3 days, but scattered across Scripture are glimpses, hints, clues, enough to stir wonder. 1 Peter 3:18-20 says, "He was put to death in the body, but made alive in the Spirit. And through the Spirit, he went and preached to the spirits in prison." What prison? What spirits? Some believe it means Jesus entered the spiritual realm to proclaim judgment over the fallen, to announce his victory to the powers of darkness. Ephesians 4:9 adds more mystery. He also descended into the lower parts of the earth, not just the tomb, but somewhere deeper. And Jesus himself said in Matthew 12:40, "As Jonah was 3 days in the belly of the fish, so will the Son of Man be 3 days in the heart of the earth." Not just resting, not just waiting, he was moving, working, declaring. The silence wasn't still. It was sacred action, hidden from human eyes. Some believe Jesus descended into hell itself, not to suffer again, but to confront the very powers of darkness face to face. This view is often tied to the Apostles' Creed, which says, "He descended into hell." But why? To set captives free, to declare to the underworld, "It is finished." Imagine Jesus stepping into the darkest place imaginable, not as a victim, but as a king, breaking chains, calling out names, walking through the shadow of death with fire in his eyes. The silence above was thunder in the depths below. Another powerful belief is that Jesus was waging spiritual war, not with swords, but with divine authority. Colossians 2:15 says, "He disarmed the powers and authorities and made a public spectacle of them, triumphing over them by the cross." What if the cross wasn't just his sacrifice, but his weapon? While his body lay still, his spirit was tearing down walls, overthrowing principalities, shattering curses, declaring freedom for every generation. Heaven didn't stay silent. It roared in realms we couldn't see. Some believe Jesus simply entered paradise, just as he promised the thief on the cross, "Today you will be with me in paradise." Luke 23:43. This view shows Jesus not in war, but in rest, at peace. Not defeated, but fulfilled. Imagine him in glory, surrounded by saints of old, Adam, Abraham, David, Ruth, welcoming him, the lamb who would become the lion. Sometimes rest is a sign of victory. Even God rested after creation, and Jesus too may have rested before rising to finish what he started. And finally, some believe Jesus was preparing eternity itself, clearing the path, making a way, tearing the veil between God and man. The silence in the tomb wasn't the end, it was a beginning. He wasn't lost in death. He was unlocking the door of life for us. John 14:2 says, "I go to prepare a place for you." What if those 3 days were spent doing just that? Not just rising, but rebuilding, so that when you feel abandoned, overlooked, or stuck in silence, you'd remember, even in death, Jesus was making room for your redemption. The spiritual meaning behind the silence. We often fear silence. We assume it means God isn't listening, that he's distant or done with us. But what if silence is actually holy? What if the silence after the cross wasn't a pause, but a preparation? God does some of his greatest work in the dark. The seed doesn't sprout in sunlight. It breaks open underground, hidden, silent, but growing. Jesus' silence wasn't powerlessness. It was divine patience, a sacred space where victory was unfolding beyond human sight. And the same is true for you. When God seems silent in your life, when prayers go unanswered, when doors remain closed, it doesn't mean he's not working. It means something deeper is happening. He's healing in hidden places, shifting things in the spiritual realm, preparing breakthroughs you can't yet see. Just like the disciples who thought the story was over, you might be standing in the middle of your own resurrection weekend, not realizing that Sunday is on the way. So don't fear the silence. It may be the sound of something holy being born. Here's the truth we often miss. Those 3 days were not an interruption. They were the mission. Jesus wasn't resting. He was reclaiming. He stepped into the darkness of death and turned it into a doorway. He descended so we could rise. He entered silence so we could hear the voice of grace forever. He walked through death so we'd never face it alone again. This wasn't defeat. It was divine strategy. While the world mourned, he was dismantling hell's authority, breaking chains that bound humanity, and rewriting the future of every soul. Those 3 days were the loudest sermon ever preached, and not a single word was spoken. So what really happened during those 3 days? We may never know every detail, but we know this: Jesus turned silence into salvation, darkness into destiny, and death into deliverance. Those quiet moments were full of eternal power. And today, when your own life feels quiet, when God feels far away, remember, the silence is not the end of the story. Resurrection is coming. What do you believe happened during those 3 silent days? Was it a battle, a descent, a heavenly rest, or something even deeper? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. We want to hear your voice, because this story isn't just about the past. It's about what God is doing in your silence today. If this video spoke to you, share it. Send it to someone who's stuck in a dark season. Let them know God is still working. And don't stop here. In our next video, we explore what really changed after the resurrection, how Jesus' return from the grave shattered more than death. It rewrote the future for all of us. Click the link. Stay with us. There's more to uncover, because the tomb was empty, but the story is just beginning.